Our first task in this project will be to design a core data model for our books. We'll then add a SwiftUI view so we can create new books in the database. First things first, our data. Go ahead and open up bookworm.xcDataModelD. That's our data model. Then press Add Entity and rename that to be Book. We're going to make one of these books for every book the user's read. In terms of what constitutes a book, we're going to add a variety of attributes right here. Starting with an ID, a universally unique identifier so we can tell each book apart in the database. So we'll make this one a UUID. Then there's a title of the book. This will be a string. Then we'll have author, person who wrote the book, also a string. Then we'll have a genre. This will be one of several strings we predetermined in our application. This will be a string. Then we have a review. This is a free text description of what the user thought about the book. That'll be a string too. Lots of strings. And then finally, rating. The user's 1 to 5 rating for this book. This is going to be an integer 16. Now, most of those will make sense, but the last one is odd. Why integer 16? What's a 16 do, and how come there's also 32 and 64, right? Just like double and CG float and other ways of storing floating point numbers, there are different sizes of integers too, depending on how much you want to store. An integer 16 like this can store numbers between the range of minus 32,000 approximately and plus 32,000, so a fairly small range. Integer 32, that'll be bigger. That's down to minus 2 billion up to plus 2 billion, or thereabouts. And 64, that's just a very large number. It's like minus 9 quintillion and up to plus 9 quintillion. It's absolutely massive. The point is, these kinds of data things here aren't interchangeable. You can't take a number from an int 64 and put it into a 16. You just can't. The 64 has 64 bits, binary digits, to hold its number. The 16 only has 16 of these things, so there's not enough space to store a bigger number. You'll lose data. And similarly, if you made everything into an integer 64, you're assigning way more data than you need. So you're wasting a lot of space. And so core data says, let me know how much you actually want. In our case, we'll say 16 is fine. Our next step is to write a form that can create new entries in our core data model here. This is going to combine many of the skills we've seen so far, like form and at state and at environment and text field and text editor and picker and sheet and more, plus your new core data skills too. So start by making a new SwiftUI view, calling this thing an add book view. In terms of properties, we need to have an environment variable to store our managed object context that was passed in when we made our app over here, this thing. So we'll say at environment /dot managed object context var moc or mock, because I'm lazy. Now, as this form is going to store all the data required to make a book, we're going to use @state properties for each of the book's values except ID, which we'll make dynamically. So add these next. We need @state private var title empty string. I will copy and paste a few times. We've got title empty string. We've got author empty string. We've got rating, that's 3. We'll have genre empty string and then review empty string. Finally, we need one more property to store all possible genre options. So we're going to pick out using for each. So we'll add one last property here. We'll say let genre equals fantasy, then horror, then kids, mystery, poetry, romance, and thriller. And now we can have a first pass at the form itself inside our view body right here. We're going to improve it soon, but it's enough for now. Replace this current body with this. The navigation view with a form inside. I'll have a few sections here. The first one will contain a text field asking for the name of the book, We'll with text bound to .title. Then a text field of author's name with text of $author. Then a picker asking for a genre with a selection of $genre. We can loop over every one of our genre array and make text out of it. We can say for each genres, ID of self, and then text $0. That's our first section. The second one's where they add a review. So we'll say there's a section here with text editor, text of $review. Then use a picker for our rating, bound to selection of $rating. Then for each 0 up to 6, text of string $0. That's our picker. Our little header here saying text write a review. And then we'll have one last section down here for our save button. And that'll add the book. That's our form done. We're going to make sure we add to the form itself, not to the navigation view, to the form, a navigation title of add book. Okay, now obviously there's a big hole right here, but when it comes to adding in the button's action, we've got to make an instance of our new book class using the managed object context we were handed in. Then we'll copy in all the values from our form, that's title, author, and so forth. We've got to convert rating, because right now it is an int. It needs to be an int 16 to match our core data model, and then save the managed object context. Most of this work is really just copying one value into another, with the only vaguely interesting thing being that conversion between int and int16 for the rating. Even that's pretty guessable, int16 of rating. Anyway, we'll say here, let my new book be a book with the context of our managed object context. Our new book has the ID of a new UUID, so a new random identifier. Then we'll have new book.title is our title, new book.author is our author, new book.rating, that's the conversion, int16 of rating, then new book genre equals genre, and new book.review equals our review. And then try mock.save. Write those changes out. And that completes our form for now. We're going to make it better later on. But for now, we need a way to actually show this thing when books are being added. Now, showing our new add book view thing here, this involves returning back the content view.swift and adding all these little steps to show a sheet. That means adding a state property to track whether the sheet's showing or not, adding some kind of button in the toolbar for this case to toggle that property, then add a sheet modifier that shows add book view when the property becomes true. This is all hopefully good practice for you now. You know it already. Let's find out. In our content view, let's add some properties. We'll say at environment here, / manage object context with var mock. I spelled object wrong, sorry. There we go. And we'll also have one for our fetch request. So we'll say fetch request, request with a queue, sort descriptors will be an empty array, var books is a fetched results of book. And then one for our sheet, at state, private var, showing add screen with capital S, equals false. So we get a managed object context to store the view context for our core data model, so we can use that later on to delete books. We also have a little fetch request reading out all the books we've saved so far. Added here specifically so we can show updates in our UI if you know it's working correctly. We'll say, yeah, there's 1 book, 2 books, 3 books, whatever. Plus a boolean here that tracks whether the add screen we designed earlier is showing or not. For the content view property down here, we're going to add a little bit of navigation views. We're going to have a little title plus a button to add a new book. But otherwise, it'll just be some plain text with a little counter so we can see it works. How many items are in the books array? 0 to start with, then 1, then 2, then 3, and so forth. Just to be sure everything's working. Remember, this is where we want to add our sheet modifier to show an add book view as needed. Anyway, in here, there's a navigation view. The text, just for debugging purposes, count is books.count. Has everything worked correctly? That's what we're saying. This thing wants a navigation title, Bookworm, like that. Then a toolbar here. And we'll say the toolbar item with a placement of navigation bar trailing as a button inside. And we'll do showing ad screen dot toggle as a label. And we'll say label add book with system image of plus. Now we'll add our sheet. .sheet is presented. $showing ad screen, and then add book view. Now here, you have noticed I've explicitly made a toolbar item with navigation bar trailing, because later on we'll add a navigation bar leading button as well to handle a dedicated edit done button. Bear with me, we're almost done here. We've now designed our data model, our book entity with those attributes there. We've created our form here to add new data. And we've now gone to content view and written code to present our new form. The final step is to make our form dismiss itself when the user adds a book. Again, we've done this before. Hopefully it's all practice for you. You know the drill. We've got to add a new environment property to add book view for the dismiss action. So we'll say at environment /dot dismiss var dismiss. And then finally, add a call to that at the end of your button's action. So down here, we save and then call dismiss. Let's press Command R, give it a try, make sure it all works correctly. So count 0 by default, there are no books. I'll press plus, enter a book name. The Lord of the Rings. The Lord of the Rings or the Lord of the Rings? Lord of the Rings, sorry. And then J.R. Tolkien as the author. Genre is fantasy. And then rating, great book, 5 stars. This was a great book, although I didn't really get the Tom Bombadil thing. Multi-line text, remember, so you can add as much as you want here. Anyway, when I press save, all being well, it'll dismiss, and now, boom, count is 1, which means both content view and the new add book view are reading the same core data information.